that I'll start at the very beginning. Before I got pregnant with my first daughter, I just started having dreams of having this baby girl and really feeling like I was going to have a baby soon. I was going to have a girl. And I had wanted to wait a little bit to get pregnant. So I was like, how about I just start right now, going forward, preparing my body for this baby. And I had so many beautiful experiences in the inner work that I was doing, really clearing ancestral trauma, awakening to patterns that I had that had been passed down through, from grandmother to mother to me. And, around not loving myself, learning how to really honor what it is that I was wanting in my life, and learning how to speak my truth, how to hold boundaries, all this stuff that I really wanted to be able to integrate that work. And before I had my daughter, so I could be really clear and careful not to pass all of that on to her. And I really did it. I did some very deep work before she came, and obviously the work, it never ends. It just continues through, but she was a catalyst for a lot of inner work for me. I remember, we were not trying to have a baby. We were kind of at the point where we were like, okay, let's let go a little bit. If a baby's gonna come through, baby's gonna come through, but we're not going to actually try to have the baby or prevent. So we were just doing pull out basically for a while. Like a baby sneaks in, that's fine. So that's kind of where we were. And I went to this really beautiful initiation for a young boy turning 18, whose name was Sequoia. So when I had arrived, I was really feeling like I wanted to have this baby soon. And I was kind of in a little bit of conflict, like, do I just have this baby? Do I wait a little bit? We didn't have all of those, the house and the job, everything really figured out. And so I was thinking that was necessary first, but my whole heart was this baby just wants to come now, and I'm ready to have the baby. So I went to this initiation, and as he was talking about his name, Sequoia, I had this big moment, and I felt like, whoa, that is the name of my child. Her name is Sequoia. And I went home and told my husband, we're going to have a girl, and her name is Sequoia. And just knew right away. And he was like, all right, that sounds good. I got pregnant pretty soon after. The pregnancy test, it was so early on with all my babies. I found out so early. And so only one line appeared. And I thought, oh, I'm not pregnant. And I felt, a little disappointed, but we're just going to move on with the day. And I left the test on the kitchen counter, I think, somewhere. And I went back to the other side of the house. And then my husband, I heard him say, there's another line. I was like, what? He ran in there and just jumped for joy and jumped into his arms and twirl around, and the whole really happy experience of finding out. And we were just, really overjoyed. And, the pregnancy kind of took a turn. Everything was going well until I hit probably, 6 weeks and developed some really significant hyperemesis. I was throwing up about 10 times a day. I lost 10 pounds. And I got to the point where I couldn't walk. So I'd wake up in the morning and I would crawl to the kitchen where my husband had left a protein shake or something after he went to work. And I would get it and crawl to the couch and just sip it on the couch and throw up all day long. It was horrible. And my provider, I hired a midwife, just the first midwife I interviewed, who I really loved. She asked me what is your dream birth? What do you really want to experience? And that's a question that most providers don't ask their clients. And I just felt like that was so beautiful. And I wish that I had, at the time investigated deeper the way that I was being treated and cared for. Sometimes I think that we can make assumptions about people assuming the best and thinking this person clearly aligns with my philosophy. And so I really like them and they're a great person. And I just decided that she was great. I wasn't reassessing and checking consistently for alignment with what it is that I was wanting and needing for my care. And so I was noticing that, I wasn't getting what I needed for the hyperemesis care, but I also didn't really know that there were alternatives at that time with the first pregnancy. And her approach was it'll get better, Sorry. There was really no care. I liked that she would come over to my house for prenatal appointments and would talk to me and do the appointment while I was suffering, like lying down on the couch, not able to sit up. And she just really normalized it, which, caused my husband and I to also normalize it. And it wasn't until my second pregnancy that I realized, like, oh, I have hyperemesis and this is not normal, and there are totally things I can do, and that's part of a different story. But I remember that was very challenging until about maybe 20 weeks, and I felt much better after then. Yay. And the rest of the pregnancy was really smooth and beautiful. I loved being pregnant. I loved having, this big pregnant belly. I do remember feeling very alone, though, throughout the pregnancy. Not super, my husband and I have always been, and he is now my ex-husband, we're always best friends, but there's something deeper that we didn't have together that I was needing and a deeper level of intimacy that I didn't realize I needed at the time. And so I felt very alone. And I had a lot of people in my life, but many of my friends were, not parents yet or nowhere near. I think I was 23 when I was pregnant with her, so I was still pretty young. And I remember trying so hard to create an experience for myself that was in alignment with what I really wanted for pregnancy, which was this like community connection, allowing myself to be centered. And I found myself educating, a lot of people really not acknowledging, just the normalization of isolation and pregnancy was a big theme. And I found myself really fighting throughout pregnancy and postpartum to try to get support or try to have people, understand the importance of the connection and the support. So I did feel pretty alone. And I think that was a big theme for that pregnancy and birth for me, and the catalyst for healing that she offered was this awakening to see how I was abandoning myself. And I saw later on that the ways that I was abandoning myself were being reflected in my reality, and I created a lot of abandonment in my marriage, in my relationships with friends. And I just continued that pattern until it reached a head and finally decided I didn't want to suffer anymore and learn to love myself. So that's the biggest, I feel a little emotional talking about it. I think that's the biggest thing that my daughter helped me do and taught me how to do was to love myself. And I'm so grateful, because if I could give her anything, in life, it would be a pathway and skills for loving herself. And I remember on her third birthday, we have this tradition where we go around the room and have everyone say something we love about her. So it's all her little 3-year-old friends, and they're so cute, and they're like, oh, we love that you play with me, or whatever it is. And then it's her turn, and there wasn't any Sequoia, your turn. What do you love about yourself? Try to get her to say something. She was like, now it's my turn. I take the talking stick. And she was like, she just said, I love myself. It was so sweet. I really love myself. It was just so natural. She just had that self-love. So I feel like I succeeded in my parenting and in the goal that I had for her. So our relationship, I feel like, goes very deep and many, touches many lives for sure. I had prodromal labor for weeks and weeks. It was around 35 weeks. I started getting a lot of prodromal labor contractions, and I was like, oh, my baby's coming soon. And I remember texting my midwives, and I was like, can you come at 36 weeks? Or is it 37? And they said, yes, we can do 36. And I was like, great, because I'm having all these contractions. So that must mean my baby's coming soon. Now I obviously know that's not true. I like to teach the people I support to recognize that prodromal labor sometimes can be really, really long. And through that, I learned that labor is not linear. It's not like we're pregnant and then we're in labor and then we're in postpartum and then we're out of postpartum. We kind of just enter this portal, right, at the end of pregnancy. And I was totally in that portal, laboring a little bit and then tapering off and laboring a little bit. So I was dipping my toes in the water, regularly having so many prodromal contractions, and then waking up every morning feeling so sad that I didn't have my baby yet. And it was around 40, almost 42 weeks. I was getting pretty close, and I was feeling pretty exhausted emotionally from this whole journey of the prodromal labor contractions. And my midwives told me, I didn't know this before, but told me around that time, we're not going to be able to bill your insurance if you go past 42 weeks. So if you want your services paid for, you need to have your baby like by this date, which unfortunately I think a lot of people at the end of pregnancy are hit with some kind of something like that because of lack of clear communication and understanding, at the beginning with those agreements. So, and I was comfortable going past 42 weeks, but I was like, okay, well, I'm really ready for baby to come. And I feel like I'm right on the edge of labor. We checked my cervix and I wasn't, dilated enough to do a membrane sweep. So I was like, I'm just going to do some castor oil and encourage labor to come. And as you know, castor oil can make contractions closer together and more uncomfortable. And I did experience contractions really close together, I think, from the castor oil. So, spontaneous labors can be much easier. But I still feel good about the choice that I made. It worked out well for me. I didn't have any big side effects from the castor oil, and I did take a very small amount. So I feel like I was really right on the edge, and just that little bit, it was like a tablespoon with a little bit of mild circuit and some spinning BBs, I think was all that was needed. So I bet if I waited just a little bit more, I would have just gone into labor spontaneously. But yeah, it was perfect though. So I went to the bathroom and came out, walked down the stairs. My husband and I were just having like a labor induction day. And so, we're doing the castor oil, going on walks, having a cuddle, having sex, kind of doing the mile circuit. So we were doing some of that, and I came downstairs and he was making paper origami frogs as like an early labor project. So we weren't sure if I was in early labor or not, but I sat on the birth ball and I felt like I had come up on a little bit of mushrooms. I really felt this like wave of like whoosh, all that release of oxytocin. Felt like, whoa, like my heart feels so open. I feel so altered. Like I don't want to go anywhere. Like I'm not driving anywhere. I'm not going out. I really felt like I am going inward. And it was beautiful. It felt very blissful, very euphoric, sitting on the birth ball, like rocking my hips when I had a contraction and just breathing. I felt like I was just in bliss. It was a really, really beautiful experience. After a while, I started feeling like I wanted to go on a walk. So we went on a walk and would stop and I would have a contraction and keep going and stop and have a contraction. So things started to pick up, and then all of a sudden I was feeling all this pain in my back. And it was around this time that I texted my doula, who is actually not a trained doula, but a wise elder in my community, who I was like, you must be at my birth. And she's a very dear friend. I told her, like, this is the same as all the prodromal labor with the contractions at this pattern, but I feel different. And that was the key, this feels different. And she was like, I'm coming. She was a few hours away. So she starts heading over. I had some other women that were supposed to come to my birth, or I really wanted them to, and spirit aligned for them to not come, which ended up being the right thing for us. But my vision for my birth was to be surrounded by women who were like singing to me, and I was really involved with women's circles, and I loved being in that circle of women. I had one who had a family event she chose to go to. I had another who wasn't expecting me to go this far, and she had a trip to go to. And then I had another who was going to do videography, who I texted, and she was like, I'm kind of tired from the day. Like, I'll drive down. She was a little far away. I'll drive down a little later when you're in active labor. And we called her in active labor and she just didn't answer. So it ended up being that just my doula was on the way at the time, and that actually was perfect. I did feel like the abandonment was a big theme for my birth for sure. I'd process that later. But it was also, like I said before, this reflection of self-abandonment that showed up in the birth. But yeah, my doula started heading over. My husband's mom came over and brought us dinner. And so we had a dinner and we were just hanging out. And then my back just started really, really hurting. And I started feeling like I was getting from the castor oil, I think, these like continuous contractions with like not a lot of break and all of this pain in my back. And I started feeling like I just can't do this anymore. In early labor, you know, I was just in so much pain in my back. His mom stayed for a little bit and massaged my back. She wasn't like planning to be at the birth, but it was perfect for her to just stay and give me a little massage. My husband would massage my back. And if someone was constantly massaging my back, and if I lived in hands and knees, and with like never getting out of hands and knees, which is very hard to do when you're big pregnant for hours, I was okay. But the second they took their hands off my back, I was just in agony. My midwife was like, try some, magnesium, try taking a bath. And so I think I took a little magnesium, but it was just like so painful. And then my doula arrived and she just, replaced mother-in-law and started doing back massage. And I had a big pop and a gush. My water broke in this explosion, just like the movies, all over. And the baby turned and took the pressure off of my back from her position. And all the sensations just moved right into my belly. And my doula is like covered in amniotic fluid and the floor is covered in amniotic. It actually like scared me. I stood up quickly and I looked at her and I was like, like what just happened? And then I said, I'm going to go get in the shower. I'm going into active labor now. I just knew it. So she cleaned up, bless her. She's amazing. And I got in the shower and I had the shower hitting my back and it felt so good. And the first contraction came and it was this contraction all in my belly. So the back pain was gone. And I had been longing for labor. I've been a lover of birth for so long. By that point, I had been a doula for 9 years. So I was just so excited to experience birth. And I think that attitude of entering it with this like, yes, this like deep, deep yes and celebration of the experience is what allowed it to be so pain-free the rest of the time. I would describe her birth after early labor as a pain-free birth. I did not experience any pain. It was just like I experienced ecstasy. I experienced bliss. It was beautiful. And it was my baby and I doing it together. And my husband was there and he was sleepy. So I would remember waking up from contractions and he would sit up from bed to just kind of be present with me and then he'd fall back asleep. So he was, not as present, but he was still there. But it didn't feel like with my current husband, it felt like we were doing this together. In this birth, it was like my baby and I are doing this and I have people around me supporting me. And it was really sweet. So I just felt really connected to her. And I spent my whole labor in the dark. It was a 5-hour labor after that. In the dark, in the corner of my room, on my knees, leaning over my bed to rest and just kind of getting upright during a contraction. And my doula just sat in the dark corner on the opposite side of the room, just holding space. And it's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want anyone bothering me. I didn't want anyone talking to me. And everyone was very respectful. My two midwives, husband and doula, were very respectful. At one point, the second midwife, which was like the backup assistant midwife, right, to my current one, came up and said, your midwife left to go to another birth. So this is like another layer of abandonment that came up. And I remember being like, in the moment, I'm in labor, so I was kind of like, okay, whatever. And that midwife ended up being the midwife for the delivery, which was fine, but I could feel that she was tired. I could feel that she maybe at times didn't really want to be there. So I felt really unsupported. But once again, the experience was very positive in itself, with me just feeling like I was holding the container so well on my own. But looking back on it, I felt a lot of really deep abandonment, and that followed me in my next two births. At one point, I started feeling like I don't really want to do this anymore. That was my transition. It was pretty easy as far as transition goes. I was like, I think that I'm done now. That I now sing to all of my students and doula clients. She came after baby was born and sang it again and recorded. I recorded it so I could learn it. So she wrote this song specifically for this birth. I am opening into love. I surrender it all to love. I am opening up to bring forth love through me. I surrender the reins to love. I am surfing the wave of love. I'm opening up to bring forth my sweet baby. I am opening. I am opening up to bring forth my sweet baby. My sweet baby, my sweet baby. I'm opening up to bring forth my sweet baby. So sweet. So that when she was singing that, I felt like so good and really supported. Like that was what I needed. Just kind of feeling like this is getting a little hard. And her song just guided me through those harder moments. And then, so this is, in transition, I look at my husband's eyes and I tell him to moan with me. And here he was really, really present. And we were looking in each other's eyes and I just felt like no pain. But with the contraction, I felt like love was bursting through me. It was beautiful. It just felt like this love energy bursting through my body. And I was like just so humbled, experiencing and surrendering to all of it. And then suddenly I felt this pressure and I felt a little pushy. And my midwife checked me and I was 9.5. So she said, try to hold off pushing until your body really spontaneously is pushing. And so I went downstairs to get in the birth tub and I sat on the toilet to try to pee first, and I had this big contraction and I was like, she's gonna come out on the toilet. It felt like all this pressure. And I was like, I'm not having my baby on the toilet. I really want to be in the tub. So I get up and I try to book it to the tub. And then I have another contraction in the kitchen and I braced myself on the kitchen counter and bared down a little bit and had this big spontaneous push. I was still kind of trying not to push, like she said. I said, it's so hard not to push. I remember shouting that. It's so hard not to push, trying so hard not to push. I didn't really understand that I could push when I was ready to push. That instruction, I think, confused me. When I got in the tub, she said, you can push if you want to. And I was like, oh, it was interesting how I was outsourcing. Yeah, and so once I got in the tub, she was born, I think, in about 7 minutes. So it was very, very quick. I just pushed a few times. I was in hands and knees. Yeah, I was on my knees. I was leaning over the tub and my husband was there in front of me. So I was kind of cuddling into him. And then I instinctively felt some pressure. I remember saying oh, it burns. And there was a little bit of burning I was noticing as her head came through. And I had a fear of tearing and I had not really addressed that fear. And I didn't practice pushing. I didn't practice preparing to push. And so when that time came, I just went, I'm going to tear, I'm going to tear, I'm going to tear. I just started chanting because I felt overwhelmed by the sensation of pressure. And I didn't have any tools. And I felt like I wanted to ask for help, but I had no idea even how to. And if I did, I don't know what anyone would say. So I just kind of went with what I was doing, which was chanting, I'm going to tear. And then I did tear. Though I didn't really experience pain. I don't remember pain from tearing until later. I think because of all the endorphins. It was a 2nd degree, so it wasn't a really significant tear, but it was still a good tear. And I instinctively lifted one leg up and her head came out And I said, there's her head. And my husband reached down and he touched the head, and I touched the head, and then we're just waiting. And that was a really sweet moment, waiting. We looked in each other's eyes and we kissed and we cuddled. We talked to our baby and we said, like, come on, baby, we're ready to meet you. And on the next contraction, and this was another thing with the midwife, I remember she was right there and she wasn't projecting any rush on me, but I was worried that she would want to get the baby out, because I had made my wishes clear about waiting for head and body with my other midwife, and this one I just didn't know, she didn't know that about me. So, and she did great in this moment, but I was a little worried. So I started pretending like I was having a contraction before I had the contraction, just to just in case, to prevent her from saying something about it, about waiting for the next contraction. So I started grunting a little bit, and then the contraction actually came, and with one push, I pushed her body out really easily, and she just came out right into the water. And then I reached down and picked her up, and I pulled her up to my chest. My husband put his hand behind her back and kind of lifted her up, and she cried right away. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. And I remember saying, I did it. I did it. I'm amazing, which is just how I want every mom to feel after they have their babies. Wow, I did it. I'm incredible. I got out of the tub and got onto the couch, and I delivered the placenta. The placenta came really easily and quickly. The midwife did a little bit of downward traction on the cord after a while to help it clear, and there was no one pulling or anything like that. She nursed right away. She latched easily. And then this was 3 in the morning or so, and I just spent the rest of the next couple hours hanging out on my couch while my family came over, and were really respectful. We invited everyone over immediately, which I wouldn't recommend everyone do. It was very sweet though, the first grandbaby, our first baby, and it felt sweet to share that with them. Everyone came and silently just kind of sat in the back and just loved us from afar, or one person at a time would come and kind of look at me and give me a kiss on the head. It was very sweet, and they would hand feed me blueberries and give me sips of water, and I felt very surrounded and loved, and got some stitches, for the tear. And then my midwife tucked us into bed. This was the moment too where I felt like she's tired and just wants to leave, where I was lying on my bed and was trying to figure out bed sharing with the baby, and I remember her attitude was kind of a little tired. And I remember that was really hurtful. And I still feel some hurt around that, just wanting the people who are, supporting me through these really vulnerable, sacred experiences to be loving and patient, and to hold that torch of this is an honor to be here, with you, which is how I like to show up and support moms in feeling. So I did feel a little sad about that, but we got tucked up, we went to bed, and then woke up in postpartum.